Do you think this second chances idea, so you talk about it's not what happens to us, right?
Yeah.
That matters. It's how we respond.
Yeah.
Right. So
Right.
do you think that second chances, it's probably about, hey, like society needs to give these people second chances, but is a piece of it, without me reading the book yet, like,
Yeah.
hey, you got to give yourself a second chance.
100%. 100%. Yeah. I mean, because we're our worst enemy in a lot of ways. But yeah, I mean, I was doing that for a long time, like until relatively recently. I would make a mistake. I would wake up and be hungover, or think about like what I did the night before, or look at, where I wasn't professionally, and just beat the crap out of myself, and would completely forget about and disregard the fact that I served in one of the most hostile, crazy parts of the world, and made it better. Like, I know Afghanistan didn't turn out the way a lot of people would have hoped, but when we showed up in Sangin, you couldn't peek your head around a corner without getting shot at, or like, and 8 months later, when I left, our patrols we would go with empty rucksacks, because the markets had all come back to life. And we were just going, it was like going shopping. We were just walking through and grabbing bread and pomegranates and, and meat and stuff, and like going back and cooking with the locals, and like it just transformed, And so but I had forgotten about that. And I was so quick to forget about the fact that I managed to sneak a dog onto a helicopter, hide him on a major U.S. installation, in plain sight, and then get him back to my dad in New York City. I mean, as hard as it is for me to say it, I completely wrote that off, and I was focused on all the things I wasn't doing, all the places I wasn't going, and that we all do that. And yeah, so you're right. It totally starts with you. You have to give yourself some credit, and that's what, not to just blatantly plug our podcast, but that's what my wife and I love about our idea for our Stubbornly Positive podcast, is that we can show people, by having people on, that what their
What's possible.
what their stubbornly positive moment was. Like the first episode, we talk about Fred's DNA, but I also kind of talk about my stubbornly positive moment, and then we had my dad on, who's a big part of my story, and we asked him, what's a stubbornly positive moment for you? And it was hard. He had to think about it, and we almost kind of led him to it, but like, and he sees it. You're like, wow, like, yeah, there was a point in my life where, I had a choice, and I made, arguably the harder one, and and I faced, some scary choices, and it led me to this. And then we have my friend Jess, who's the girl I met at the dog park, who asked me the question, and I just laid into her with the story. We're still friends. We had her on, and it's the same thing. We ask her, what's a stubbornly positive moment for you? And so I hope that it inspires people, to ask themselves, what was a stubbornly positive moment in my life? And so we can start to just hype ourselves up a little bit more, and realize how resilient, how tough, how loving, people really are, when we think about it.
So your mindset, the stubbornly positive. To name the podcast, you had to be experiencing that.
Yeah.
Right, and that outlook and that perception on life. And so what are you seeing? I don't know when it started. What are you seeing as some similarities around people's story?
Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely, people facing something that a lot of that they could easily turn from. You know what I mean? Like our friend Jess, she's a therapist. She realized after some of her friends lost their dogs that there's no space for pet loss therapy. And because it's not something we want to think about or talk about. And so she started a practice based on pet loss. And like, that's a really difficult subject. And like, and she's leaning into it, and so that's the one kind of similarity that all everybody's story has, is there's a moment where you could have, the world was showing you, all these different excuses to be negative, to like, Fred could have raised his fur, growled, snapped at me, and that would have made all the sense in the world, right? But he didn't. He wagged his tail, and that had changed the trajectory of his whole existence. And it's like my friend Jess, like, she could have looked at like, wow, like, yeah, this is a really difficult subject. I'm not going to deal with this. And nobody would have even known, or nobody would have, second guessed it. But she's choosing that, and we have we've traveled the country so many times over the years since the publication of Craig and Fred. And there's just everybody we meet, we hear stories like that, and we see examples of that. And so, yeah, that's the idea of stubborn positivity. It's, I think, one of the things we really want to distinguish it from is the toxic positivity, which is, I always use the example of that. I think everybody's seen it, the meme of the dog in the like house on fire. It's like he's like sipping a cup of tea, and it's like everything's fine.
It's not fine. No,
it's not fine. But that's to me, like, just when people say like, oh, just be positive, like it's dismissive, right? And stubborn positivity is the opposite of that.
Like in the face of.
Yeah, exactly.